Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I used to live in a tiny studio apartment in Chicago right after college. It wasn't too much, just a single room on the top floor of a 3-story walk-up, but it was cheap. Close to work, and all I could afford as a broke 23-year-old with student loans. It was clean, functional, and most importantly, mine. The apartment had only one window, which looked out over a narrow alley. Across from me was another building nearly identical to mine. The alley was so tight a single car could barely squeeze through. It got almost no sunlight during the day and was pitch black at night. I never really thought about it until something started happening. At the time, I worked late nights bartending, usually getting home around 2:30 or 3 o'clock a.m. I'd kick off my shoes, make a snack, scroll on my phone, then crash. One night, about a month after moving in, I noticed something strange. I had just turned on the overhead light when I saw movement in the window across the alley. Just a twitch of a curtain. I froze, but when I looked again, the window was still and dark. Probably nothing, maybe a draft. But the next night, it happened again. This time, I was sure I saw it, a hand pulling the curtain back slightly before letting it fall. I couldn't see the person behind it, only a sliver of movement in that dark window. What unnerved me was that I had never seen lights on in that apartment. I always thought it was empty. From that night on, it became a ritual. Every time I came home and turned on my lights, the curtain across the alley would move, always within seconds. It wasn't just coincidence. Someone was watching me. I tested it, I'd leave my lights off and sit silently by the window. Nothing. But the moment I flicked them on, the curtain would shift. It was like whoever was in there had been waiting for me. I asked my landlord about the unit. He told me it was vacant, had been for months. I asked if someone had moved in recently. Just shook his head and laughed, saying I was paranoid. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? Someone might be looking at me from a window. No crime, no proof. Just dread that grew worse every night. Then one night, it all escalated. I came home later than usual, around 4 o'clock a.m. When I got to my door, I noticed something wedged in the frame. I thought it was a flyer, but when I pulled it out, it was a crumpled note with a single word written in pen. Hey, my blood ran cold. My first thought was of that dark window. I ran to it. The curtain was still, no movement. I grabbed my bag, called my friend Jamie, and got the hell out of there. The next day, I demanded my landlord open the apartment across the alley. He hesitated, but finally agreed. When we stepped inside, the place was exactly as he'd said. Dusty, empty, lifeless. Except for one thing. In the back room, the one facing my apartment, was a single metal folding chair, positioned directly in front of the window. Someone had been sitting there, watching me, every single night. The police came and checked the place. Think they took fingerprints, but they never found out who it was or how they got in. I moved out that same week. To this day, I still think about that chair, that window, and that note. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that somewhere, someone is still watching me. Story number 2. When I was 12, my family moved to rural Oregon, miles from the nearest town. Our new house sat on a large piece of land, surrounded by endless pine forest. It was quiet, peaceful, and completely isolated. The house was built in the 1940s. Creaky floors, a dusty attic, and a detached shed that sat about 30 feet from the back door. The shed was packed with tools and junk from the previous owner. My dad always said he'd clean it out someday, but he never did. For the most part, we stayed away from it. The first strange thing happened late one night. I was up reading under the covers when our dog Max, a friendly but alert golden retriever, started barking like crazy. Max didn't bark for no reason. I crept out of bed and peeked through my window. Max was facing the shed, barking into the darkness. The motion sensor light by the back door was on, throwing long, eerie shadows across the yard. I didn't see anything. I waited until Max calmed down, then went back to bed. The next morning, we found deep boot prints in the dirt between the house and the shed. My dad brushed it off, probably a neighbor or a drifter passing through, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Over the next few weeks, Max barked at that shed again and again. We'd look outside and find nothing, but the boot prints always returned, always leading to the shed, and never away from it. Then, one night around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel outside my window. I froze. The steps paused, then started again, moving toward the shed. I peeked through the blinds just as the motion light clicked on. And there he was. A tall man stood by the shed door, wearing a dirty gray coat. His face was hidden in shadow. And then, the light went out. My heart felt like it stopped. I backed away from the window, shaking, and ran to wake my parents. My dad grabbed his rifle and stormed outside, but whoever it was had already vanished. The footprints were fresh, leading to the shed. My dad unlocked the padlock and pulled the doors open. Inside, just dusty tools and old tarps. He added a new lock and reinforced the doors. For a while, things were quiet. Then, Max disappeared. We searched the woods, the road, asked neighbors. He was gone. I was heartbroken, but I held on to a tiny hope he'd come back. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., I heard the back door creak. My dad was already awake, rifle in hand. We moved to the back door together, just in time for the light to flicker on. The man was back. He stood by the shed again, but this time he was holding something. In one hand, a knife. In the other, Max's collar. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my body. My dad shouted and raised the rifle, but the man bolted into the woods. We called the police. They searched the property, and what they found inside the shed still haunts me. The dirt floor had been cleared, symbols carved into it. Crude, disturbing shapes. In the corner was a pile of bones. Animal bones, hopefully. But the worst part was what they found behind a false panel in the wall. A backpack stuffed with wallets, watches, pieces of clothing. Things that belonged to other people. And a notebook. Page after page of jagged handwriting, incoherent ramblings, crude drawings of houses, families, and eyes. He was watching us, like he'd watched other families. That night, while we were packing to leave, I looked out my window one last time. The police tape around the shed fluttered in the wind. And just beyond it, 10 feet into the tree line, I saw a face. I screamed for my dad. He came running, rifle in hand. By the time he looked, the man was gone. My dad charged outside, screaming into the woods, firing his rifle into the air. I had never seen him that angry. The kind of anger you feel when someone has invaded your home, taken your dog, and made you afraid to sleep at night. We moved out within days. And to this day, I still wonder what would have happened if we had stayed. Story number 3. In the summer of 2018, my friends and I, Abby, Marcus, his younger brother, Tim's girlfriend Hannah, and me planned a weekend trip deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We were all fresh out of college, early 20s, ready to unplug and get away from everything. We picked a spot far off the grid, miles from the nearest cell signal. The air was cool and smelled like pine and wet earth. The first night was perfect. We hiked in, found a clearing by a lake just big enough for 3 tents, lit a fire, and cooked hot dogs and marshmallows. We stayed up late, drinking, laughing, staring at the stars. It wasn't until the second night that things felt wrong. Around 11 p.m., we were still sitting by the fire when Marcus suddenly went stiff. He pointed toward the tree line and whispered, "Did you see that?" We all turned, but saw nothing. He swore he saw a figure duck behind a tree about 30 yards away. Tim said it was probably a deer, but 20 minutes later, a loud stick cracked from the same direction. Abby was visibly shaken and said she wanted to sleep. Nobody argued. We put out the fire, zipped up the tents, and tried to sleep. That night, I woke up to the sound of breathing. Slow, labored, ragged breathing. Just outside the tent, no more than 10 feet from my head. At first, I thought I was half dreaming, but it kept going, steady and real. Maybe it was one of my friends getting up to pee. But I didn't hear anything except that breathing, and it sounded wrong. Like an older man, short of breath, almost wheezing. I froze. My flashlight was in reach, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it on. The breathing moved slowly from one side of the tent to the other. Then it stopped. I stayed still for what felt like forever before I finally fell back asleep. In the morning, I didn't mention it, neither did Abby. But when we sat down for breakfast, Marcus looked pale. "Someone was outside our tent last night," he said. Hannah nodded immediately. I heard them too. They circled the tent more than once, and sounded like more than one person. I asked if any of them had gotten up during the night. Tim said he had, but then admitted he saw a figure crouched by the fire pit around 4 a.m. We checked the ground and found footprints circling all 3 tents. One of them, in a patch of wet dirt, was a bare human footprint. No boots, no shoes. We tried to laugh it off. Maybe just a weird hiker or some prankster, but it didn't feel funny. That night, we stayed up later, huddled around a much bigger fire, flashlights ready. Around 2 a.m., we heard leaves crunching somewhere in the woods. Then, a voice. Low, too far away to understand, but definitely human. Marcus switched on his flashlight and caught him, just for a second. A man, naked, crouched behind a tree. He bolted the second the light hit him. We were frozen, whispering frantically about what to do. Hannah wanted to pack up and leave immediately, but Marcus and I said no. Hiking out in pitch darkness while being followed sounded worse. That night was the longest night of my life. I didn't sleep at all. Hours passed. Then a stick snapped. I whispered, "Please let it be a deer." Silence. Then a man's voice from the woods said, "I see you guys." I went cold. I didn't hear any of my friends react, so maybe they were still asleep. Or maybe they were too scared to speak, like me. Then I heard my tent zipper. Slowly, it began to slide down. I screamed as loud as I could. My friends screamed too, and whoever was outside bolted. I yanked the zipper shut and stayed up until dawn, gripping my flashlight like a weapon. As soon as the sun rose, we packed everything and left. At the ranger station, we told them everything. The ranger just nodded grimly and said they'd had reports before. A man, maybe more than one, living somewhere out there. Some just stole gear. Others did worse. We didn't ask what worse meant. In the car, we tried to laugh about it, but it didn't feel funny. I haven't been camping since, and every time I hear a zipper at night, I remember the sound of that tent slowly opening, and the voice in the dark saying, "I see you guys."